This is an Irish Independent podcast.
Well then, Caelan Doris, Irish captain of course, in his media dealings today has urged Ireland to relish the pressure of coming off the back of last Friday's poor performance against New Zealand. And I guess there is a degree of pressure suddenly. We're a little more curious about just where Ireland are. Argentina are in town, having a very good 2024, it must be said, under Felipe Contepomi. They arrive looking for a first ever win against Ireland on Irish soil. Kickoff is at 8:10 live on Virgin and TNT. And as ever, our coverage of the autumn series on Indo Sport is brought to you by Energia, who sponsor rugby in Ireland at all levels. At grassroots, there is, of course, the Energia AIL. They are the official energy partner to Leinster, Connacht and the Irish men's and women's teams. And you will be well aware, I'm sure as well, we've been mentioning it, the Energia Rugby for All initiative very much supports inclusion and a welcome to everyone of all abilities to participate in the game. To learn more about Energia's partnerships and their exclusive home energy offer for rugby fans, you can check out energia.ie/rugby. Happy to say Cian Tracey once again here in studio. Hello.
Hey Joe, how are you?
And been a while, but Eddie O'Sullivan, former Irish head coach, is with us. Eddie, great to have you on. Stateside you are at the moment, but great to have you with us.
Yeah, Joe, thanks. Yeah, looking forward to it.
So the team was named on Wednesday by Andy Farrell. There's just one change really to the starting 15. Robbie Henshaw comes in for Bundyaki. More change on the bench. Ian Henderson gone. Conor Murray gone. And Kieran Frawley gone as well. In comes Ryan Baird as cover for second row. Craig Casey is in. And Sam Prendergast, set to make his debut off the bench, is in. Also set to make his debut off the bench is Thomas Clarkson, 24 years of age at tight head. Has only played in the Champions Cup once for Leinster, but this is his chance. And so away we go. Thoughts, Cian, on the changes Andy Farrell has made? It's generally, you starting 15, get back out there, sort this out amongst yourselves kind of situation.
Yeah, I think that's what we probably would have expected as well, Joe. If you look at the way Andy Farrell has tended to pick his teams, even if you go back to the summer in the first test defeat to South Africa, there was calls for there to be sweeping changes across the board, but it's just not his style. And look, I might have expected maybe one other change in the pack, perhaps. But if you look back to the second test win in Durban, Gary Ringrose and Robbie Henshaw played, and it was Bundyaki who dropped out for that second test. And he dropped his then captain, Peter O'Mahony, which was a big call, obviously, at the time. But I think this team and this group of players have enough credit in the bank, I suppose, to prove that last week was a bit of a blip. But the Argentina side that's coming to Dublin this week are going to be no pushover. So you mentioned at the top there, Joe, there is pressure, and it's mounting pressure, I would say.
Thoughts on the pressure? You must miss being a head coach, Eddie. I mean, he's lost a game, but there is a lot of scrutiny this week on Andy Farrell and decisions he's made, with the bench in particular last week being criticised.
Yeah, I think, to be fair, Ireland are such a high standard now, number one in the world, arguably number one or two, whatever you want to dice it. So with that kind of level of performance comes expectation. And I suppose last weekend was a damn squib, really, whether we like it or not. It was a real underperformance, not very, very much not in the form we expect from Ireland. They generally pitch up on the big days and they deliver. And they've lost some of those big games, like the World Cup against New Zealand was an incredible game. They came out the wrong side of it, but nobody was able to moan after they didn't pitch up on the day. That was the big takeaway last weekend. So suddenly, the calls for, has to be sweeping changes. I think Farrell is very smart about that. And I've been in that position where we've had a very bad performance with Ireland even, and people are saying it has to be sweeping changes. I think the problem with that sweeping changes is basically you would say to the guys who went out last week, you didn't get it done, and I don't have any confidence to fix it. That's really it. That's the message. And it would be a rather silly thing to do, given that team has delivered, particularly during the summertime, away from home, won a test series against the world champions. So he has to double down and give them a chance to really pitch up this week. So, and the fact of the matter is that performance or lack of last week was between their ears. But we know they can deliver a high-skill game under pressure, but they just didn't deliver it last week. So I would say Gary Keegan's the busiest guy this week in camp. He's getting everybody's head in the right space. And whether it was last week, you can get it sometimes in camp, everything is going well and you buy into the mantra, everything's going to be fine. And it's like the old story, you get a punch in the mouth early on and the wheels start to wobble. So I think he's doing the right thing. He's got to double down with the squad and say, look, we didn't deliver. We've got to do it this week. No, if things went pear-shaped next or tomorrow night, or on Friday night, sorry, I think he would have a situation where he would have to maybe think twice going into, and certainly Fiji's an opportunity. But overall, in terms, I think it's a smart play by him. The only thing I was interested in, there wasn't much talk about it, and maybe Keane might have been interested in Keane's take on, is about the dropping of Bundyaki, where that emerged from. I just thought, I didn't think Bundyaki had a bad game. In fact, he was our main go forward off our launch plays. So I was just wondering why he made him at that change. It wouldn't be something I saw coming, to be honest.
Yeah, my sense of that, Eddie, would probably be that Andy Farrell has options in midfield. I didn't think Bundyaki had a great game. Obviously, he is a massive source of go-forward ball for Ireland, particularly off set piece. But look, you have Robbie Henshaw. He's only played one game for Leinster this season. I was actually a bit surprised that Jamie Osborne wasn't the one who got the nod there, considering he was very unlucky to be left out of the starting 15 last week, considering what he did in South Africa. Now, I know, albeit it was at fullback, but he's been playing at 12 for Leinster this season while Robbie Henshaw has been out. So I would say, Eddie, it was a bit of a trying to get Robbie Henshaw a bit of game time, which I don't think is any harm, really. So that's where I would be on that. I think I should explain, Joe, what I meant by being under pressure. I don't mean Andy Farrell is under pressure for his job or anything like that. But what I mean is, Andy Farrell in his press conference yesterday made it clear that lots of players were lucky to be playing again. And Eddie touched on it there. We hold Ireland to certain high standards because of what they've delivered on the pitch over the last few years. So whatever we're saying on the outside, you can be sure that there's pressure internally as well. And that's all they'll be focusing on. But I thought I should explain what I mean rather than Andy Farrell is under pressure for his job or anything ridiculous like that. But this team has put a serious body of work together that we should expect more than the really poor performance that we saw last weekend.
Something that's interesting this week, Eddie, and Andy Farrell said it last week, and it was unusual for him to say it, but he has said it again this week. So the gist of what he said last week, when people were asking him, because you would have experienced it too, the public love a new player. Freshen it up. Can you bring someone? He's been in very good form for Ulster. Why, bring him in? Why are you so conservative for? So Farrell said last week, you can't pull a rabbit out of a hat and throw people in if they're not ready. This is what he said pre-game last week. We're not South Africa, we're not England, we're not New Zealand in terms of there being thousands of players out there that you can just throw in and see how it goes. That's not the way it is here in Ireland. And he repeated that sentiment yesterday. So do you agree with them? Do we maybe overestimate the base he has to pick from?
I think we do. I think I agree with him, actually. And of course, sometimes we get bored of winning, which is a great thing, and we want change for the sake of it. Some of those changes, people are calling for, because it'll be interesting to make the change. The truth of the matter is, I always go back to say that, look, the reason it's called test rugby is because you're going to get tested. And if you put a player into a test game, you can never be sure. I mean, I've got it wrong a few times in my time picking players, but you think they're ready and you put them in and they're not. And maybe sometimes they are ready and you're not sure, but you try and err on the side of caution, because two reasons. One, if you put a player in and they're not ready, it can set them back a long way, particularly a young player, and they may never recover from it. And at the same time, you do want to build your options. And again, you've limited opportunities to roll the dice as well. You look at the season, the Six Nations is non-negotiable. You can't fiddle around to Six Nations. If you lose the Six Nations game, for whatever reason, that's a grand slam gone, possibly. But where Ireland are now, you're talking about winning at least 4 games a year and being in the show for a grand slam. That's where we are. That's what we expect. And even in the autumn there, you've a small window again to try and, wriggle around and see what you can do. And I take Keane's point about Robbie Henshaw coming in. And I'm a huge fan of Robbie's anyway. I don't think there's any loss there, Robbie coming in. I just thought he might have stayed with Bundyaki, but that's another discussion. But I think, the Fiji game is where he's going to roll the dice and throw guys in and see what it's like. No, that might not be level 1 test rugby. But again, and I always say the other thing about coaches making selections is, nobody has more information than Andy Farrell about a player. We all have opinions, and I might think this of a player and that of a player. I will tell you now, I don't have as much information he has. So he's an experienced coach. He knows where a guy needs to be to play a test game. And if he feels a guy's not ready, he's dead right not to pick him, because it's a lose-lose if the guy isn't ready. So I understand that, and we do get a bit anxious at times. I mean, I used to get a lot of a pound in my time for not changing the Irish team more. There was a lot of criticism of that, and I get that too. But the guy's going in, is he better than the guy you're taking out? Is he ready for it? And it goes back to the point, we don't have a ton of players in Ireland. And you look at the bench now, suddenly with 2 injuries at tight head, and suddenly, with a player who could potentially, and the thing about it so is, like, he could be in the game after 30 seconds. And, you have, if Clarkson going in there now, and he's woefully unprepared in terms of experience. Now, he might do absolutely fine, and we'll find out if he goes in. But again, like, that's the situation that probably makes Andy Farrell's case, is that we're not drowning in players. That when you go below the first two on the depth chart, it can often get very skinny. So I take his point very well there.
I would tend to as well, I must say, Cian. I think it is easy for us on the outside to say, go on, throw someone in and let's have a go. And at times it is almost out of like an interest on our part to see how they would go. But when you're in the hot seat and you have to deliver results, I mean, there aren't that many games, as Eddie says, and there is a consequence to dropping a player. You have to keep that player on side as well, because you may well need them down the line. I took Farrell's points as being very valid. I thought it was interesting he felt the need to make them. He's not in the habit really of defending himself too often. Yeah,
well, I actually got this very wrong. I thought, and I should have known better because Andy Farrell is such a strong communicator now, I thought he might not have articulated himself very well, and maybe if he had his time back last week, that he might have worded it a little bit better, because I think there is plenty of talent in Ireland. I'll get on to the point about maybe over egging the pudding a little bit, and I'd be guilty of that too at times, but the fact he doubled down on it yesterday makes me think, or it's clear that this is something that is going on in the background and in his head, and he wants to, I suppose, make it clear to supporters like that the quality that he believes or they believe is there isn't quite up to scratch. Now, I think if you look at the success, Joe, of the Ireland under-20s over the last few years in particular, and the style of rugby that they play. The style of rugby is absolutely brilliant to watch, and lots of people are watching it Friday night, scoring a hatful of tries. It doesn't always translate to test level rugby because it's a bit faster, it's a bit looser, a little less structure, but the gap to jump from 20s rugby to senior test rugby is huge. And I think at times I'm guilty of that as well, of maybe not allowing that, because I think that's where a lot of supporters' frustration is probably coming from, because they're seeing Ireland under-20s teams win Grand Slams, they're seeing them get to World Under-20 World Cup finals, and then it seems to be a little bit slower to introduce them when it comes to the senior team. But the jump is pretty big, I would say. Now, that's not to say that there isn't talent across the board in lots of positions. I do think prop is quite clearly an issue. Tight head has reared its head at the moment on the back of, as Eddie has said, the injuries to Tadhg Furlong and Tom O'Toole. But we're actually worse on the loose head side, because if anything was to happen to Andrew Porter, then we're going to have an even bigger crisis than we do at tight head. So that is a big concern, and I actually think it's one of the biggest tasks facing David Humphreys at the moment. He's obviously come in as performance director to take over from David Nusafora, who did actually warn that this was going to come down the line, that because we only have 4 professional teams, obviously, there isn't enough game time to go around for these guys to test and to see if they are going to be able to make that step up. It was interesting as well. Andy Farrell made the point yesterday that once upon a time there would have been URC or league games, whatever you want to call it, during the Six Nations, where guys would have got valuable game time. And these are the reasons why the IRFU have introduced the Emerging Ireland Tour. As controversial as that has been, their interprovincial A Championship is making a comeback. I think it's this weekend actually. So guys will get game time there. But again, you can't. How much are you going to judge a player on an A Interpro in terms of making the step up to international level? So
yeah, well, on that point,
sorry, Joe, can I just jump in there?
Yeah.
There's an overarching point there I would make, is that we do have fantastic pipelines in Ireland in terms of our academy systems and the schools rugby. All that works very well, but it's not a vast array of numbers. The numbers aren't colossal, and that's a fact. And it's the pyramid goes very narrow very quickly in terms of the supply chain. And an interesting point, which not everybody makes, might be convenient to make, but when you think about it, 4 of the Irish backline that started last Friday night were not in the Irish system. They came through the international system, and throw Finlay Beelum in on top of that, and a third of the team that started against New Zealand didn't come through the Irish system. Now, that's not a bad thing. I'm not saying we should change that. I'm just saying is that we get carried away sometimes that we've got this flood of incredible talent coming through. And we have got fantastic talent, but it's not a flood that people might think. And I would say, stop and think twice before you buy into that narrative that we're awash with these world-class players on every side. It's not that simple. And the point Keane made is very valid. There's a massive jump from under-20 international, even to Heineken Cup, even to, test level. Again, it's a massive leap. Even the best Heineken Cup match to see and some of them are phenomenal, it's not test rugby. So all that has to be part of the conversation before you get too carried away with it,
No, absolutely. And it was interesting. Murray Kinsella was making the point that Sam Prendergast has made it to the bench, and he was drawing the comparison with France and Ireland. So if you take that World Cup final of 2023, Sam Prendergast played in that game. He's the first Irish graduate from that team to senior level, and Gus McCarthy also on that team. He's involved in the training camp. You compare that to France, who won the final, and their centre Nicolas Deporter has 2 senior caps for France. Their second row Tuilagi has 4 caps. Their flanker Nucci has 2. Adesogbi has 3, and there are 3 other players from that World Cup final in 2023 involved in the training camp. Now Murray qualifies that to say, one, it's a super talented French 20 side. And secondly, when Andy Farrell had to grapple with South Africa away, France left all their frontliners at home and went to Uruguay and to Argentina as well. But it was obviously a less demanding tour. And then the key point as well, in France, there are the guts at 30 clubs where these players are getting so much more experience. He went through the number of caps that the Irish players have for their provinces from that World Cup final of 23, that 20s team, for their provinces versus the caps that all the French players are getting domestically. And it's night and day. They're just double and triple the number of appearances of the Irish players. And he quoted Nusafora in 22 saying, what's happening now is that we have a model where over the next couple of years, we are just going to run out of space. And that's sort of the other thing, Eddie, is that you say, you've been in Andy Farrell's position. You're throwing in Thomas Clarkson on the bench on Friday and he has 1 Champions Cup to his name. Whereas for Galtier, he might have a guy who's played, half a dozen Champions Cup games. This is the other thing. It's like we're saying to the international manager, throw him in. He can't get 20, 30 matches into these guys easily.
But you just made a very good point there about Murray's point about the number of games these under 20 players have played at the club level in France. It's an easier solve for them because there's so many clubs. Yes, we've got 4 clubs in Ireland, and we want to be winning the URC. We want to be in the semi-final and the final of the Champions Cup. We want all the headlines, but at the same time, and probably the only team that probably gets away with it to an extent is Leinster, who make lots of changes all the time, and some people might say often make too many changes for their own good. But we don't have that capacity in the other provinces to make those rolling changes all the time, and so guys get into the academy, they get a lot of training in the academy, but they don't get access to the frontline game, which is really the college of hard knocks at the end of the day, where you go out in a professional game and you learn hard lessons and you get knocked around. And we don't seem to be able to give that exposure regularly to those young players. And the facts of the matter is we just have 4 teams and they've got to come through those 4 teams. And we don't want them going somewhere else to get that experience. We don't want to go to England. That's been a bad idea from the off. So we are in this kind of a constriction with a small number of teams representing our professional rugby game at club level. And then so that whole compression you talked about happens where they don't get access to the frontline game on a regular basis at club level, which is a starting point. And that's to give you an idea if they're ever going to make it to the next level.
Yeah. The point about France as well, I mean, everyone will focus on the top 14, but the Pro D2 has never been as strong as it is. You look at the quality of players that are there. I was over in Biarritz just on a holiday at the end of last season.
I was there too, at one stage.
Eddie, you'll know this. I mean, in the Pro D2 at the moment, I don't like people who don't realise should go over and actually see in any of the so-called smaller French clubs, not that Biarritz are, but the town came to a standstill. It was the last day of the season. The TV coverage was wall-to-wall, jumping from game to game in the second division in France. So while we might see, the top 14, and that is the glitz and the glamour, their second division is absolutely huge at the moment as well. Would you agree,
That's a great
Eddie?
point. It's a great point, absolutely, because I was the 2 years I was in Biarritz, it was 28 league games. Mm-hmm. It was just insanity. I mean, it was week after week after week, relentless. And my first year in Biarritz, But the whole year we had 3 academy players play the whole year, 9, 10 and 15, because we had injuries and we didn't have the players. And those guys just had to learn. Now, one of them actually, ironically, Maxime Lucu, is the backup to Dupont. He was the scrum half I had in Biarritz my first year. He was in the academy.
Yeah.
And you just had to throw them in. There was enough players. And my second season, when I ran off the rails, we started the season with 25 professional players. So that season was brutal. It was, and if there's ever like a college hard knocks, it's Pro D2. I mean, it is just, and the passion they play with, the whole tone comes out. It's a phenomenal experience. But that is I think Keith's right, that's a massive plus for French rugby, despite the fact it doesn't get the headlines. It's an incredible league.
Yeah, really interesting. That's the big picture. We'll get into Friday night and specifics next. So, Eddie, I haven't heard you talk in a while. Obviously, you're not kind of on the media circuit as much. I'd be very interested for your sense of the dynamics at 10. In comes Prendergast. Cian Tracey goes away and licks his wounds. He hopes he comes back in, I'm sure, next week or the week after. And Jack Crowley is maybe not as comfortable in that number 10 jersey as he had thought he might have been a few months ago. So give us your broad sense of Prendergast, Crowley, and where Frawley's featuring too.
I think Crowley is struggling a bit, and I hate to say it, but I think that is the environment he's coming out of in Munster is an unsettled environment. And, you know, a player, especially number 10, who's going to be the key decision maker in a game, everything's going through you all the time, you're making all decisions. I think the way Munster have been having an up and down season and morally down at the moment, they've no head coach. That environment does wear on you. And he's still a young player. He's still a very inexperienced international half. So trying to cope with that and then go into a huge frontline game with Ireland, I'm not surprised his form is off. And I don't want to throw, under the bus, but he did struggle in the game. And I wasn't surprised that they took him off because he really wasn't energising the team like Sexton. You remember when Sexton was in the Irish team, and again, he's no Johnny Sexton yet. He could well be, but Sexton energised the team, and that's what you're looking for a 10 who energise the team. And that wasn't. He's done that. He's done games like that, but it wasn't there Friday night, and I think it was a smart substitution. Unfortunately, Frawley, who has come off the bench before, who was the hero in South Africa, fluffed his lines even worse. So that was probably hugely disappointing for the players themselves and for the Irish management. I think it's a very tough call to put in Prendergast now over Frawley. And it's one that does worry me a little bit. Because Frawley has gone, and I hate to use the old cliche, from hero to zero literally in 2 games. Like, he's not involved at all this weekend. So the question is, will that have a negative impact on his rugby personality? Like, how does he come back from that? And I'm sure, look, you've got a fantastic sports psychologist with the Irish team, Gary Keegan, would have been talking to Frawley a lot, would have been talking to all of them. But I just hope that this shift doesn't do damage to Frawley, because I think he's a fantastic player. I'm a huge fan of Frawley's. And probably his biggest problem is he's too good. He can play 3 positions. So he gets moved around a lot with Leinster, which means he doesn't end up being the number 10 all the time. But I feel bad for him. As for Prendergast, I think he's a phenomenal talent. But I would question if he's really up to that to test level at this stage. I haven't seen enough. But again, I would qualify that by saying Farrell knows a lot more about him than I do. So Andy must feel he's ready. But it's a funny dynamic. It's a kind of a situation where we thought we had 2 world-class 10s, and a potential 3rd world-class 10, and it's a bit up in the air at the moment. No, that does happen. It'll work itself out, I presume, in time. But I just feel bad for Frawley. I really do. I just hope this doesn't set him back further. The fact he's basically, not involved at all this weekend. I just think it's a very harsh call. But again, I'm not having a go at Andy Farrell. He has more information than I do, and he's got to do what he thinks is right for the team.
No, that's all very fair. I must say, Cian had the same sense of Frawley as well. I thought, geez, I mean, he must be thinking, well, God, do I have no credit in the bank? I mean, I don't remember everybody else playing brilliantly. A lot of you guys are still playing tomorrow night, so he must be feeling a little bit sore about it.
Yeah, it's hard to disagree with any of Eddie's points there about the 310s, actually. Frawley, yeah, look, my sense is that we're not privy to what's going on behind the scenes in training. Maybe he's not training that well, because it does seem like a pretty drastic decision, because it's obviously wasn't on him that Ireland lost the game. Now, he did come on when Ireland were in a winning position. They were 13-12 up, but the fact that Andy Farrell took Jack Crowley off when he did from a winning position, I thought was pretty damning as well. Like, whether it was premeditated or whatever, but I don't really know if it would have been so.
Sorry to interrupt. The only caveat would be, as Eddie's kind of alluded to, we don't have the inside scoop on the messaging. So there is obviously the possibility that Farrell sat down with Frawley this week and said, look, game didn't go well, but I always wanted to give Sam some time against good opposition. So we're going this way this week, but you're starting, for instance, for me against Fiji, and I'm going to take Sam off the bench that day as well. And then for the last game, it might be you or Jack. One plays, one's on the bench. But don't take it to heart. Fiji game is yours, my friend. Like, that could be going on in the background.
Absolutely, and that's what I mean. We're not privy to what's going on behind the scenes. And one thing that I would say, and I agree with Eddie, that you would be concerned about how Cian Frawley would take this going forward. But
if it's a drop-in,
exactly. Yeah. But I suppose you can call it what you like. But he's being left out, like, of, after a really tough day in front of a sold-out Aviva Stadium. He was coming back after being the hero in South Africa. But Andy Farrell is a very good man manager. We hear that a lot about, the soft skills and stuff like that. I'd be very surprised if he left him out and was going to be worried that this could affect Cian Frawley going forward, regardless of what the reasons are, Joe, behind the scenes. And I wonder if he thinks that he will be able to handle this and he will be able to get the response that he desires out of it. So a really tough week for Cian Frawley, but there's pressure on Jack Crowley. I don't think it's time, and not that anyone here on this chat is, but I don't think it's time to write him off whatsoever. I think the Munster situation is probably weighing on him a little bit. He's still only 24. This is still only his first full year as Ireland's first choice 10. I thought he had a really good Six Nations. And all of a sudden you have Sam Prendergast, who I agree with Eddie, and I've been writing about this today, is that, look, the hype train has already left the station in terms of Sam Prendergast, but we actually don't have a huge amount of evidence to see that if he is going to be Ireland's next long-term 10, of course, like, I'm excited as the next person about his potential, but at the moment that's what it is, it's potential. He's played 20 senior games for Leinster, only 8 of those were starts. He started all 3 games in the Emerging Ireland Tour. Again, you could question the standard of those games. He's only 21. He looks like he has everything he needs to be at the top level. Defensively, I think he is a big area that he'll have to work on. I think if he comes on, I'd be very surprised if Argentina don't look to get after him in that 10 channel. I think he still has a bit of meat to put on the bone there. He started the Leinster Lions game just before the international window at the Aviva Stadium, and he looked really good early on. He had the Leinster attack, probably the sharpest Leinster's attack has looked. And then it started raining at half time, and for the second half, Leinster lost control of the game. And I asked Leo Cullen, for an assessment of Sam Prendergast's performance afterwards, and I thought it was quite pointed that he said, look, he probably needs to learn how to control a game better in those kind of conditions. So this goes back to our earlier point about being, calling for guys to be thrown in when we're not really sure if they're ready. But Eddie made this point earlier in the chat. These are the type of games that are made to see if guys are ready, because if you're not going to throw them in now, like the Six Nations is obviously the serious business. So I'm excited to see what Sam Prendergast can do, but I think there's cautionary tales out there. It's not that long ago Harry Byrne was being tipped to be the next big thing. There's the cycle is going, or the wheel is going to keep churning, Joe. There's a young Leinster 19-year-old Casper Gabriel coming through at the moment, who's being described as one of the best schoolboys of the last 20 or 30 years. So we need to be careful, I think, about overhyping, particularly our young 10s in such a pressurised position before we get to see enough evidence to see if they are capable of delivering, I suppose, consistently at the top level.
Okay.
There is a slightly bigger other dimension as well. It wouldn't apply to every player that comes out of a province, but particularly for a 10, if you play 10 with Leinster, you usually get an armchair ride. Mm-hmm. You're usually on the front foot for most of the day, and you don't get under terrible pressure. Whereas, like, we can say the same thing of an international game, and so often I like to see a player in that key position, a 9 or a 10, in a game where things are going pear-shaped, and they've got to figure a way out of it. And I suppose, and I don't see any reason why Prendergast wouldn't be good enough to do that. But to Keane's point, I don't think we've seen him in that situation, except possibly your point, Keane, about the wet weather blowing in and him not being able to manage the game as well as he did when it was dry and he was on the front foot. So that's another dimension to it. Yeah. But if he gets, I mean, let's say worst case scenario that he comes off the bench early because of an injury, and he's in with an hour to go. That certainly we'll find out in jig time against a team like Argentina, because if they sniff a weakness, they will go after it relentlessly. That they've always been good at that.
Yes, same on Thomas Clarkson. Keane, what would you say of him making his debut?
Yeah, he was part of a very strong Ireland under-20s team in the generation just before Sam Prendergast, but he's played a lot more games, but like you said, only one Champions Cup game. Like, you'd have to say it was pretty telling that Leinster went to the market and brought in Rabah Slimani. Now, I know that like Thomas Clarkson, I'm sure, will learn a huge amount from him. And David Humphreys has obviously brought in the rule about not signing overseas props. Slimani seems to have been the last one through the door there. So he was very impressive, Joe, at under-20s level. But again, back to my point, this is the big boy stuff, as Andy Farrell would say. He's very good around the park. I think he'll fit Ireland's style of play very well. He's very skillful on the ball. I think he'll be comfortable in that kind of Tyg Furlong-esque, linking passes out the back. But look, the meat and drink of Hanny Tided is obviously going to be the scrum. And I don't think this Argentinian scrum is as good as maybe other ones that we've seen back in the day. But like Eddie said, if he is to come on, look at what happened to Tom O'Toole last week. He only lasted a minute or two when he came on. If something was to happen to Finlay Bealham, then we'll really find out quickly. It'll be sink or swim territory for Thomas Clarkson. But if it didn't go well, we shouldn't write him off. Same with Sam Prendergast,
sure. Eddie, a more general question then, we'll move away from the tens discussion, albeit the fact that this is the first year without Sexton. I mean, that's probably a big part of the story here as well. I'll give you the two extreme versions. Maybe the truth lies somewhere in the middle, but I'd be curious to see which one you're closer to. So Friday was either just a weirdly bad night at the office and you can almost just disregard it, or is it telling of a more prolonged dip in this team? So if you're an optimist, you would say, well, hang on, an amazing 2023. They won the bloody Grand Slam. They lost that World Cup quarterfinal the way they did. There's no shame in the way they lost that quarterfinal. This year they come out, they win the Six Nations again. They drew 1-1 away in South Africa. Will you just chill out and be a bit more realistic about what to expect from a team versus, well, they started the Six Nations well in France, but it wasn't so good the rest of the way through. They're now 3 defeats in 5. This team is not humming. It's just not humming the way it did in 23-22. Maybe attack has been figured out a touch. We are in for a more prolonged dip here.
Yeah, I think I would make 2 points. One is that we haven't become a bad team in a few months. We're a very good team in South Africa. We bounced back. With the same, like, for me, one of the biggest achievements of this team was winning the Test series in New Zealand. Having lost the first Test. Like, that never happened. It never happens. The Lions teams have always targeted the first Test, because if you lose the first Test in New Zealand, it's kind of curtains, So this Irish team have been to the well. Now, there's another side of the argument that some guys are getting a bit long in the tooth. Like, how much longer can Healy go for? Now, he's playing cameo roles for a few years now off the bench, but if Keane had to go in for 79 minutes, what's the possibilities? I thought it was interesting in terms of the changes in Ian Henderson and Conor Murray changes. They, to me, might be Andy Farrell signalling a changing of the guard there. I didn't think Henderson was a great. If I was to pick holes up last weekend, apart from the game, I thought Henderson wasn't a great selection. I just thought he's a guy who's massive experience, but I think what he's done this week, bringing in Ryan Baird, I would have thought Ryan Baird might have been the guy to have at the bench last weekend. And to be fair, Henderson came in, he had a bad moment to give up a terrible penalty that pushed the game away further from us. So, and Conor Murray, I mean, Casey to me is the man who's like in the frame. He's playing for Munster. Conor, again, great experience, come off the bench, a wet night, maybe, figures out stuff. But I think maybe those two selections on the bench might be an indicator that maybe Andy Farrell's thinking, no, it's time to start moving guys up the depth chart that were further down. Maybe there's more older experienced guys. We've got to move on here. And look, as any coach, one of your biggest mistakes you can make is loyalty, too much loyalty to a player who's gone to the well for you 100 times and, you want to see you do it again. But I don't think Farrell has done that, and I'm not suggesting that, but I think there is a middle ground here where we can still keep this team delivering And I would think last weekend was a blip. I really believe it was a blip. But at the same time, there's that evolution that has to take place. And I say evolution, not revolution.
Yes.
That's always the way to go with selection. But I think his hands are tied and always has been as an Irish coach. Those moments for evolution are very small windows. And you've got to try and make the best you can of it. The autumn is one of those windows for sure. So, again, the Sam Prendergast discussion we just had might be the key to that. Does he see as the window for evolution around 10 and see, does he have 3 world-class 10s, does he have 2, or is he stuck with 1? So I think it's a middle. I don't want dodging the question. I just think that we're not become a bad team in a few months. But at the same time, there is a case to be made that there are some guys around the team that maybe the time is to move them on sooner rather than later. Because they're beyond use, but the fact is we need to find newer guys to fill those slots. And I think that's the tricky part from now, and that's built around a situation, by the way, where expectation is very, very, very high. Like when teams are going badly and you're in a bad hole, you can make all the changes you want because people see you're moving forward. But when you're going well, you've got to be careful what moves you make, because if you start losing, then things can go fairly pear-shaped quickly,
Big time. I mean, in that context, it's not ideal he's not around next year, is it? There's a bit of job work to do here, and he's and good luck to him. And you're kind of thrilled for him to get the Lions job, but that is not ideal.
No,
and he's raising all the big picture stuff just before he
big picture. Yeah,
we don't have enough good players coming through. But by the way, I'm heading off to the Lions there. It's interesting timing, I thought.
Yeah, what your thoughts on that, Eddie? I mean, that sounds like the kind of that bit of evolution you'd want him around for and to guide players through. So it's not ideal.
I'd be forced to say if I was offered the Lions job, I would have taken it when I was there. And I was in a show at one stage, but I understand him taking it, but it's probably not the best time in a sense that the Six Nations is coming up. There is a transitional phase here for Ireland. And, we've already talked about the players that are coming near the end. I think it's a job of work for Simon Easterby to keep the ship steady for the Six Nations. They might get through it might work out great. The Six Nations is its own animal. It breathes its own life for that 2 months that you're stuck in the middle of it. So Ireland could be just fine, but if things start to wobble in the Six Nations, then you're basically the summer isn't going to solve anything because you're not together for the summer, and then you're into next autumn and you're trying to make fixes in a year's time. So there's a risk to it. I wouldn't say it's a bad idea or he shouldn't do it or it's going to work out badly, but there's a risk to it. From what Cian saying, I agree with him that this is probably not the ideal time for him to be leaving for the bones of 6 months anyway,
Eddie, you'd be in a better position to answer this, but do you think, is it a bit outdated that the Lions head coach has to miss the Six Nations of the Lions year, or am I a bit not giving the job enough credence in terms of how much work is involved? Is there not enough time, to be keeping track and then dip in after the Six Nations?
I agree with you. I actually don't think you have to be missing the Six Nations. I mean, you can all the information you need during that period of time for selections, you can gather that information on the way. I mean, you don't want to be sitting in a stadium watching a game to get all the information. I mean, the technology we have now, you can basically get a game broken down in a few hours, and you know exactly what everyone did, how well they did it, the form of the players. Because that's all. All the logistics stuff is done by other people. You're just basically responsible for now. There's the appointment of coaches and stuff, but again, all that can be managed. I actually could be done. I'm not saying it'd be easy, but it could be done. And a cost benefit analysis, I would say, losing your head coach for Six Nations is probably a risk that doesn't need to be taken. But it's been tradition now to do it for years, and I think it was based on the fact that the Lions was such a big job. It had to be 24/7 for 6 months, or it would be a disaster. And I never bought into that really. I think with technology we have now, all the information the head coach would need could be garnered during the spring, and then once the Six Nations is over, there's a few months of a run-in. So I agree. I think it's overhyped to that extent.
I think if they lose to Argentina tomorrow, Keane, and it goes to questions, you should put up your hand and put that to Andy Farrell and see what he says.
Well, last week he was asked about going on his, and I quote, jolly on the Lions tour, which he didn't really like the word jolly, which obviously it isn't.
Can't blame him for that.
No, but look, I mean, like the Lions is a huge gig. It's interesting to hear Eddie actually agrees with me, because like I understand tradition in that, but traditions can be changed.
Yeah, well, like technology has transformed the job.
But there was a time it didn't happen. I mean, I think Graham Henry might have coached Wales in the last 6 years right out that Lions job in 2001. Yeah, so it's only a recent tradition. I mean, you could argue, well, it is not a tradition because it's very recent.
It's just Gatland that's done it, really.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Now, they won a Grand Slam in his absence, did they? Did Rob Howley lead them to a Grand Slam?
Yes, I think it was Rob Howley was in charge of that one.
Yeah. So I don't know, but obviously it's a more kind of delicate time maybe in the evolution.
Well, maybe Simon Easterby leads us to a Grand Slam in the spring.
So let's finish up then with tomorrow. Argentina have won 6 of 10 games this year. They have beaten France, they've beaten New Zealand, they've beaten Australia, they've beaten South Africa. Last week they put 50 points on Italy. They're up to 5th in the world rankings now. There is a sense they're very keen to win on Irish soil. They've never won on Irish soil. They've won away from home everywhere else. So they're kind of coming here and like there's a bit of a mission about them. So this game is loaded with jeopardy if Ireland get off to a similarly sloppy start, Keane.
Totally, Joe. Yeah, I was at the Argentina team hotel yesterday for the team announcement, chatting to Felipe Contepomi, and like what a job he has done in a real short space of time. Talk about, learning his trade in Leinster. He went back, he was an assistant coach under Michael Cheika, at the World Cup. And I thought Andy Farrell hit the nail on the head yesterday when he said they're much more of a team now in terms of the backs and forwards are playing together, whereas in the past you might have had a really good, strong pack and a scrum. And then the backs mightn't have been as good or vice versa, whereas now there's just seemed to be a huge amount of joined up thinking. And yeah, if Ireland aren't on this, Joe, they could be in for another, it would still be an upset, but they're seriously dangerous. They've brought Pablo Matera back into the back row from suspension. Unfortunately, Santi Cordero, the Connacht winger, isn't playing, but they have a settled half-back partnership, which has been an issue for them. In the past, they've Juan Cruz Malia at the back, who everyone will have seen played for Toulouse, an exceptional player. Unfortunately, they're missing Santi Chacabaras as well, who's another outstanding player playing for Toulouse. So threats after absolutely all over the pitch. They've brought Guido Petty into the second row. The Irish line-out is still a big concern. By bringing Guido Petty in, I think it's a clear sign that they'll look to go after that. So yeah, there's no sense of resting on your laurels here whatsoever.
Have you seen much of them, Eddie, this year?
Yeah, I watched the Rugby Championship, obviously, and I watched them against Italy last week. I would say, without a shadow of a doubt, when you see a team and the head coach is taking over, you're looking for a stamp. What that coach has brought, has he put his stamp on the team? And I think Contepomi has put his stamp on this team already in a pretty impressive way. In the Rugby Championship, they beat New Zealand, they beat South Africa, and they beat Australia. In fact, they put 67 points on Australia. It's extraordinary. So these guys can score tries, and we saw last week put 50 on Italy. I think it was 50 at the end of the day. But the thing I see about Argentina is their back play is actually really dangerous, and that's my point about Contepomi's stamp. Contepomi was an exceptionally smart player. He knew the game inside out, particularly back play. You just watch how he played, and if he's coached the same way now, he's looking for weaknesses in the defence. It's a balance between. We always saw the Argentinians as a huge pack of forwards, big scrum, very physical, and then guys who were smart players who took advantage of mistakes. This is a different Argentinian team. They're actually constructing really good attacks and picking teams apart. And I think it's a really dangerous one for us. I mean, I think if we play it to par and what we know we can do, I think we'll win the game. But if we're anywhere below par, we're going to get caught. And I think Matera coming back, the enforcer, it'll be very interesting to see the exchanges between himself and McCarthy tomorrow night. That should be an interesting battle. Two enforcers. But having said all that, I do think this Argentinian team, and you're right, I think they're really coming to see if they can topple the Irish team. That's part of the mission. And I do think like this is going to be a really tough one for Ireland. And my worry would be if we're anywhere, below our best, I believe we'll get caught, no question. We won't get through this if we're not firing on all cylinders.
Yeah. I suppose, Cian, get a prediction from you. It's certainly tempting to predict a backlash of sorts from Ireland, and they'll be much sharper for having the run out last Friday, and things will be kind of back to more familiar territory. But sloppy start, the contagion again starts, and it's like, God, what's going on here? And momentum is a funny thing. So what were you leaning gun to your head?
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see. The weather coming into studio here was absolutely lashing out. That could probably be a leveller for Ireland, maybe you'd say, even though they obviously like to play with the ball as well.
As in take the heat out of that attack?
A little bit, yeah. Like, not to be like totally negative, because Ireland have moved away from that, but they just have absolutely lethal backs, as Eddie has just touched on as well. Paul Williams is going to be the referee, Joe. I think that's worth mentioning. Kiwi. Ireland didn't adapt well to Nick Berry last week, who is an Australian. They gave up 13 penalties to New Zealand's 5. That has to be a big focus point for Ireland this week. I did a piece earlier in the week. They've actually been averaging 10 penalties a game this year. That was the third time that they've conceded 13 in one game. So, they have to adapt to a Southern Hemisphere ref again. But I agree with Eddie's sense that, look, if they're dialed in, you look at the response that Andy Farrell got from Test 1 to Test 2 in South Africa, and if they do, if they are dialed in, if the set piece holds up, if they can hold on to the ball and not be dropping it like crazy amount of, was it 21 handling errors last week?
That part of it, I'm almost inclined to say that's just so out of character. It's just an anomaly. That's not going to be the way Ireland the ball handling of Ireland is for the next foreseeable.
For sure, but you'd like to see a little bit more of Andrew Goodman's. I know he's only in the door a wet week, but you'd like to see a little bit more of his influence as well. Mike Catt did a good job around set piece strikes and stuff like that, but obviously you need the platform to do that. So there's lots of variables there, Joe, but I think ultimately if Ireland are dialed in, and I would expect a big response. Everything that we know from Andy Farrell teams, from Andy Farrell himself, is that we will get a big response. And I feel like the players, Andy Farrell touching it, they feel like they let people down, I think. And I think they would be seriously trying to deliver a big response, and I would expect to get it, but not by a double-digit victory at all, maybe 5-6 points possibly.
Okay. I think the thing that last week that worried me the most, and I'll be watching it again closely, is that it was a game that Ireland were in. New Zealand didn't play that well either. Yeah. It was nothing like a New Zealand classic performance. New Zealand were very conservative. New Zealand only went wide a couple of times, and one of them they got a try. They tried to go up the guts all the time. And we handled that well, but when they stretched us, like the one time they did, Roland Barvery gathered a kick, they stretched to the left, they stretched to the right, they stretched to the left again, they scored. I think Argentina are going to see that, and they're going to stretch us, because we look vulnerable when we were stretched. When teams going to go through us, we were quite comfortable. But anyway, that be that as it may, the thing that struck me was worrying for me last weekend was that it was a game that was tight, even though we were playing badly, and New Zealand weren't playing that well. We were behind, we were in control, we lost control. But there was 3 big momentum shifts in the game, and we couldn't really cash in on them. And one was like, we got 10 points between the 40th minute and the 43rd minute. We got the penalty on the buzzer. Barrett got the yellow card, went out in the second half. We got lucky to give away a penalty to restart. We got instant access to 22. Ironically, we lost that maul. The ball squirted out, and we happened to be able to put Sam Kane into the in goal. And we got the scrum, and we scored. Very simple, one-off runners, and we scored. Now you think, no, we've got the game by the scruff of the neck. We go back and we give up a couple of penalties, and we take all the edge off our game. And I think there was another shift, a small one, where McKenzie hit the post with that kick, and it came back into play. And you think, oh, that's a momentum shift, and we couldn't cash in it. And then the other one was, the game was nearly gone at that stage, but there was still a chance. Lowe had that magnificent 50-22, and that was the 72nd minute. We won the line-up. We got turned over at the ruck. I think Rob Herring was held on. Ardy Savea got over the ball, and that was the game. So the thing about this, Test rugby, there's momentum shifts in that game all the time. And the question is, for me, what worried me last week is we had those 3 momentum shifts, 2 big ones, 1 small one, and we didn't cash in on them really. And I think that's something that you'd watch for against Argentina. They will have good spells in the game, but if we get a momentum shift, we have to cash in, especially at home in front of the home crowd. And I think the players sensed that the crowd were slipping away on them, and you had them trying to energise. I saw like James Lowe got a bit of stick for pumping the crowd after he kicked the 50-22, but you could see why he was doing it. He could feel the crowd was drifting over the game, and they needed him. But then they didn't bring the crowd into the game by cashing in that 50-22. So they're the kind of things I'd watch on Saturday. Are we taking advantage of the momentum shifts and upping our game to what we know we can do?
Okay, fellas, we'll watch and know a whole lot more next or by tomorrow evening, into next week. Thank you so much. That was brilliant analysis. Our autumn series coverage here in Indo Sport is brought to you by Energia. They sponsor rugby in Ireland at all levels. Energia.ie/rugby for more details and all of that. If you want to just cash in your entire weekend, there is England-South Africa, 5:40 Saturday. There is France-New Zealand swiftly following, 8:10 p.m. Saturday evening. Wales play Australia, Scotland play Portugal as well. So lots of rugby over the weekend. Cian Tracey, the Irish Independent, you'll be at the game for us tomorrow. Thank you. Eddie, lovely to talk to you again. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Joe. Pleasure.